Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Corey. I am the writer, director, producer of a new film called Superhuman: The Invisible Made Visible. The film is about the power of the human mind, the consciousness, and its ability to create a reality beyond this physical world. I wanted to do something different in the film, not just talk about these abilities, but demonstrate them, do actual on camera, real experiments of different abilities, such as remote viewing, such as telekinesis, and many different things. And of course, I was looking around for the top experts in their field, and the name of Dr. Paul H. Smith popped up as instructor of remote viewing, and I'm going to let him tell us about his background, because it is so fascinating, and what we were able to accomplish in the film, I thought, was a testimony to his teaching skills and everything else. So, Paul, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm so glad you could.
Indoors with air conditioning.
Yeah, right. I'm so glad you can make it today. Thank you for doing this.
Well, you're quite welcome. I'm always excited to talk about remote viewing and spend more time with you.
Yeah, so what's fascinating, because there are a lot of people doing remote viewing right now. There's different types of modalities, actually, even for remote viewing. But I wanted to include you because of your training and your work in the military, in the government. You know, it's fascinating. People are so fascinated by what the government does, especially in the area of psi phenomena. So can you please tell everyone, for those who don't know you, how did you get started, and what was it like to run a parapsychology discipline in the government setting?
Well, I couldn't have done this had I wanted to, right? I had to not know about it, and then they came and got me. So it's one of those men in black things, where you don't know that anything like this is going on, and then somebody knocks on your door and says, "We think you might be good at what it is we do." And I say, "What did you do? What do you do?" And they said, "We can't tell you." So it's kind of like that. I was a captain in the Army at the time, stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland, and I had not been aware, but I had moved in next door to the operations officer and across the street from one of the remote viewing trainees for the remote viewing unit. I didn't know what they did. They were just friends, and they'd been watching me. I had no idea they were doing that. They were watching me for a while because they were looking for additional folks to train in remote viewing. And so I'd never put the words remote and viewing together in my life. I had no idea this existed. I didn't know anything about it at all. And it was just really interesting. And they came and they sought me out. And then eventually they gave me a bunch of tests, psychology tests and stuff. And then apparently I scored where they wanted. And they told me what it was they did. They essentially said, we collect intelligence against foreign threats using a psychic discipline called remote viewing. We want to see if you want to sign up to be a psychic spy.
And what was your reaction?
Well, the only possible answer would be absolutely. I mean, that was the most interesting thing I'd heard in the whole time I'd been in the military up to that point,
How old were you then?
Well, it was 1983. I was 31.
So what do you think they saw in you that they wanted to test you for it?
Well, they actually had specific set of criteria they were looking for. So they wanted a military officer who is competent in their career field, which, most of us are. There's a few that aren't, but most of us are. But also an officer who had interests that might be a little bit different than everybody else's. So, but particularly in creative disciplines. So, for example, maybe they're into studio art, painting or drawing or something. Maybe they're into music. They play instruments. Maybe they're into creative writing, something like that. Languages, foreign languages was another thing. Even though it's not necessarily creative, it still uses a different part of the brain. So they were looking for officers who fit those bills. And when they got to know me, they realized I'd majored in art in college, and still liked to paint and stuff. I had been playing guitar for about 20 years by that point. I wrote lots of short stories and sent them off to get turned down. So I was into creative writing. And I was fluent in German and had been trained in Arabic and Hebrew. So they put all that together and said, we were looking for somebody who just had one of these interests. This guy's got all of these. We can't not give him a try. Of course, they didn't know if I'd be successful. Neither did I. The only way to find out once you meet those boundary conditions was to give it a try and see what happened. And I guess I succeeded. They kept me for 7 years.
Wow. So I wonder, from what you were saying, it sounds like they're looking for right brain folks.
Yes.
Or yeah, exactly, like people who are in touch with creativity or outside the analytical mind, right? That's probably.
Yes. Well, it wasn't so much right brain specific. It was somebody who wasn't totally left brain. They wanted somebody who was, and of course this whole right brain, left brain stuff, we oversimplify it, but nonetheless, they were looking for somebody who was actually more, at least was able to engage their right brain, so to speak, and not just be trapped in the left brain all the time, which frankly, a good number of intelligence officers are like that. They're really left brain, and
for sure.
Yeah.
So how long was your training? What did you have to go through?
Well, if you add it all up, it was about 18 months.
Okay. Wow.
But there's a lot of downtime in there because this was the Army we were dealing with, right? And there was some politics going on. And so there might be a month or two when we weren't doing training, and then we'd be really intensive about it for a while. But if you added up the actual time, it was probably about a year, overall a year's worth of days of training. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so was your training then the same as the way you're training others? Was that pretty much it? Or were you trained also to be able to manage you know what I mean? Like, because you train people to do something or you train people to be trainers is slightly different.
It is. And so the way it worked with us is the first thing was to turn us into operational remote viewers. That is, a remote viewer that can actually access a foreign target that we need information about. But they also wanted us to be able to convey the information, the knowledge, the understanding, the skill set that we had been given to new recruits, new people who were coming in to take the training. And so that part was kind of on-the-job training in a way, where you teach somebody else essentially the way that we had been taught. And of course, we learned trial and error. Some things work better than other things at that point. And so we were, we used some of our early students kind of as guinea pigs.
Right.
Yeah. But in the end, we got pretty good at it. We actually got the training period down to where we could have someone doing, initial fairly elementary operational tasks, real world tasks with remote viewing at about the 3-month mark. And by 6 months, they were quite competent at it and actually had some pretty good success. So, we were able to get that training period down and make it more efficient than the way it was, the way it was presented to us. But again, we were also able to avoid all of that extra stuff that we had to do that slowed things down for us too at the beginning.
So it takes about 6 months, for someone to start to be good at it.
I would say, it depends. There's lots of levels of good, right? It depends on what you want to do. But if you want to become a very competent operational remote viewer where you can handle most circumstances you get handed, it's 6 months or so. Now, in my own training that I do full scale commercially, the courses, and there's 3 levels of them, are a full week each, and that doesn't work out to 6 months, right?
Yeah.
But in between, they have a lot of homework. They have a lot of stuff they have to do. So by the time they get done doing all of that, it's at least 6 months.
Yeah.
So it isn't, obviously when you're getting paid to do that, to do this full time, it's your day job. You can really commit yourself to doing this. most folks can't do that. Most of them are learning it because it's something they want to do, not something that they've been hired to do. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they have to spread things out a bit because they also have a day job. They have families. They have, a dog that they love or a cat that they have to, deal with. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, so what are like the things that you would work on? So were you told, okay, we want you to discover something about that military base in Russia, or like what kind of things were you dealing with?
Well, the kinds of targets we addressed would be like, a base in the Soviet Union. What's going on inside this building on the other side of the Ural Mountains, right? What are they doing inside of this facility? What's going on at a certain coordinate on the ground? What there's some kind of event that happened there. What is it? We didn't get good satellite coverage of it. We need to know. We also work things like counter narcotics, trying to locate contraband, trying to help in apprehending narco traffickers, things like that. They had us work Chinese nuclear tests. They had us try and find Western hostages in Beirut and in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. They had us anything that was an issue for the intelligence community at one time or another. That kind of a task ended up on our desks. Now, yeah. Go ahead.
Because I know there's different ways to do remote viewing. So I can give you a coordinate and tell you what's over there. Tell me what's over there and who's there and what's going on. But did I tell you, can you find me where someone is without any, coordinate or any reference point?
The answer to that is yes, but. Okay. So the thing is, and I tell this story to help people understand this. You have to realize remote viewing is a descriptive discipline. You don't come up with numbers and letters and names. It doesn't work that way for reasons that we won't get into here because it's kind of complicated. But generally you describe things. And ultimately you can pick up, I call it intuitive knowing. You can pick up information or understandings about things, but you can't get an address. It doesn't work, right? You can't get an address or coordinates. So the story is they want to find out where Osama bin Laden is, right? And so the analyst comes in and asks the project manager, okay, we want to use our viewers to try and track down Osama bin Laden. Now, the first rule of remote viewing is that you, the viewer, can't know what the target is. You have to be blind to the target. And the reason for that... So you
have to ask somebody, so how does that work?
That's always the question. That's always the question, isn't it? So I'll explain as quickly as I can here. All right. So the reason you need to be blind is because then if you know what the target is, then everything you already know about it or that you can guess about it floods into your head, right? And anything you know about it or can guess about it, that's not something that the analyst needs to know. They need to know what you don't know, right? But since all this noise is in there, it makes it really hard to focus on and find the signal, which the signal is very subtle. It's very subtle, right? Okay, so what happens is they give you an arbitrary number. So I always like to use 8675309 as my example, okay?
Okay.
8675309. Okay, and then in this case, we'll say the project manager says, okay, you want to find Osama bin Laden, then we will put down the 8675309 equals describe Osama bin Laden's location, current location, right? And then what happens is the viewer gets the 8675309, and then subconsciously, the viewer's subconscious has to go out into the universe and find out what that number is associated with. Right. The subconscious discovers it's describe Osama bin Laden's current location. So then your subconscious directs you there. Your conscious awareness doesn't have any grasp of what this is, and that's good actually. And so anyway, your subconscious takes you to Osama bin Laden, and you then start perceiving these things in your conscious awareness. Well, there's this guy with a beard, and he's sitting on this chair, and he's in this really weird room that's really narrow but really long, and the walls are rocky, and there's carpet on the floor. And if you go clear down to the end and you look out, there are a bunch of dry mountains out here, and there's guys with guns standing around. And so the analyst says, oh, all right, that's it. Now, where is he?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the viewer says, you idiot, I told you where he was. He's in this funny, long, rock-walled room sitting on a chair with guys with guns in a bunch of mountains. See, so what's happened is the remote viewer has found him. Yeah. He hasn't located him.
I
right?
like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, yeah. So what I do though sometimes is because a long time ago I worked with the police. I do remote viewing, but in my own way, which I want to tell you about because when I tried your thing, it completely messed me up,
Yeah,
and I was
because you weren't
horrified.
expecting it.
Yeah, it was like so different technique. So, but it's good to share for those who are listening.
Mhm.
And so I would do exactly like you, where I would see the kid with like in a little room, and then I would like zoom out. I would see what the
Mhm.
adults were doing, whatever. But
Mhm.
then to know where it was, I would like zoom out and I would look on a map. And I would
Mhm.
see a point on the map. Now, if it's true or not, again, just like you pick up information.
Mhm.
So sometimes I would find, a city or a town
Mhm.
that I didn't know of before. I'd be like, did this say Edgewood? Okay, does that even
Mhm.
exist? And then I would look it up afterwards,
Mhm.
and it would be. So I wonder if you guys also kind of inferred, or could you do other things to then find the coordinates?
Yeah, so we recognize this as a problem. And when I say we, I mean I came into the program about 4 or 5 years after the Army program got started. So they'd already learned a lot of things by the time I
Oh,
got in,
okay.
right? And they understood this problem that you could find but not locate. And so what would often happen is the guy who's most responsible for this at the time is a guy named Skip Atwater, F. Holmes Atwater, right? We called him Fred back then, but he prefers the name Skip. And Skip, you probably know, at least a lot of the listeners will know, was the started out as the lab director at the Monroe Institute, ultimately became the president of the organization after Bob died. Bob and Lori both passed on, and so he's pretty prominent in this world, right? Well, he was the operations officer that I moved in next door to, and he'd worked out a lot of workarounds to try and help us solve the location issue. One is he'd say work the clock, and so you would position yourself where you needed to be, where the target was, and then you'd go maybe in 15-minute increments, around and describe what you saw from that perspective. Right. That's one.
Hmm.
That's one approach. Another approach would be kind of like what you're doing is you'd adopt a perspective from let's say 1,000 meters, a kilometer up, right? And then just whoa, I just lost my microphone here. Okay, no, I mean I couldn't hear myself. Okay, so you describe all the landmarks you could see, and the goal here is to try and identify significant details that someone who knew the area would recognize. And in
Hmm.
fact, it did work sometimes. I'm not going to say it worked all the time because, for example, if you're in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and you say, well, the hostage is in a white, flat roofed masonry building in a grouping of flat, white masonry buildings with a mosque in the middle of town, that describes about 150 villages in the
Right.
Bekaa Valley,
Right.
So sometimes it didn't help, but it certainly was way better than nothing.
Mm.
We also employed dowsing to try and help, and sometimes that did as well. We developed map dowsing and diagram dowsing
Oh,
techniques that would
remotely?
help
Like,
us.
so you'd be
Yes,
over a map, even though you're.
yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And it didn't work all the time, but there are times when it absolutely did work,
Yeah.
and it's certified because we're working with unknowns that nobody knew on our side of the ocean, right? That
Right.
nobody knew, and we still succeeded in some cases in actually locating. Um, Certainly, we often describe stuff they didn't know, but we did in a number of cases actually locate things and people that they had not been able to locate up to that point. So yeah,
Wow. So what was the
it had some success.
what
Huh?
was the success rate like in general?
People ask that, and I understand them wanting to know it, but there's no way to tell because in order to have a success rate, you have to know what the total set of possibilities is,
Yeah.
and then so you can do the statistics. But we have no idea knowing what the total set of possibilities is. It was just we got a task, we did it. We got another task, we did it. We got another
Yeah.
task, and so if you could have out of how many tasks, how many times you're successful,
Yeah.
that's in a way a meaningless statistic, because you don't know how that extrapolates to an entire set of possible targets, because you don't
And,
know that number, right?
and also every experiment is different. So technically, to have an accurate success rate number, it should technically be the same repeatable experiment, right? I mean, to be like really specific.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking about a lab, like if you're talking about scientific research, that's absolutely true. In an operational setting, the bottom line is whether you solve the problem or not.
Yeah, exactly. That's so fun. So since you are remotely targeting something or finding out information, does time and space, time anyway, is time a factor? So can we go back in time now and see if there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and where are they?
Well,
as an example.
Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, let me make an opinion first on that. So, this whole question of mass destruction weapons in Iraq, everybody says we didn't find them, so they didn't exist. That's actually a logical fallacy. Just because we didn't find them doesn't mean they didn't exist.
For sure, exactly.
People forget that in the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein, his mortal enemy was Iran, right? And yet he sent his entire air force to Iran so that the United States wouldn't blow it up. So there's still this distinct possibility that Saddam Hussein sent weapons of mass destruction to another country so that we wouldn't find them, right? So this whole thing about they weren't there isn't necessarily true. Okay, so let's put that on the side. Use your example.
So now can we go back and find them now?
Yeah, possibly. So here's we're talking about time here, right?
Yeah,
remote viewing time.
Correct.
To some degree, remote viewing is time independent. Okay, so over time, through our experiences and through our tests and all that stuff, we discovered that you can remote view the past just as well as you can remote view the present, right? So a skeptic will say, well, since you can't remote view in the present, then that's true, Well, skeptics don't know what they're talking about. You actually can remote view quite successfully in the present. It's not 100%, but it's way better than it ought to be if it isn't true, right? It's very clear that there's evidence that remote viewing works in the present, and there's equally good evidence that it works in past events, past situations, past states of affairs, whatever, right? So that's not an issue. The issue comes in remote viewing the future. And of course, whenever somebody finds out you're psychic, they want you to do one of two things.
Yeah, lottery.
I'll make that three. Well, one is the lottery. Okay. The other two things are find something or someone that's missing, or predict the future. Everybody thinks that's what being psychic is all about, right?
Yeah.
Well, ironically, those two things, the lottery is nearly impossible. Not impossible, it's nearly impossible. But those two things are the hardest things for a psychic to do. Doesn't matter whether remote view or anything else, is finding something missing or predicting the future. You hear about the successes, which is why everybody associates those two actions with being psychic. But the fact is, what you don't hear is all the times they aren't successful. And if you compare the failures with the successes, you'll find they are not very successful very often, but they can be successful at times, right? I had some experiences where I actually did remote view a future event, a very highly improbable future event that did actually occur, and we got total feedback on it. And maybe if we have time, we'll talk about that. I won't mention it now. But the problem with the future is it hasn't happened yet. Now you'll get people who think, oh, the time is a block. We're in a block universe, which is like a 2-before with markings on it, right? And then, it's everything's fixed. The future is going to happen because because of what happened in the past. Everything's determined. The evidence is that that's false. Okay, particularly from the remote viewing perspective, because where we might have, and I'm just throwing this number out there, don't hold me to this, but where we might have 70% success present, 70% success in describing the past, it might drop off to like 5% success describing an event in the future, capturing an event in the future, where 5 times out of 100 you might actually get it right, 95 times it doesn't happen. Okay, that really is a strong indicator that the future actually is not a realized entity yet. Now, what I think we do remote view is possible futures. And there are some deterministic futures. For example, an earthquake. People think of earthquakes as random events. It's only because we don't know when they're going to happen. But an earthquake is actually largely deterministic. There is going to be an earthquake at a certain time, at a certain place. And that's set up by past conditions. We just don't know that, right? And so it seems to take us by surprise, right? But those kind of things can, to some degree, be predicted by remote viewing because they are determined. They are deterministic. But when human intentionality gets involved, that's like this eccentricity wheel that throws everything off. When you try and predict maybe where or when the next terrorist attack is going to be, that's subject to human intentionality. And we have a horrible time doing that. It's really, really hard to be successful at that.
So is remote viewing from your perspective the same as clairvoyance and as being psychic, or is it part of it? Is it one discipline?
There are nuanced differences between these. So clairvoyance, at least if you take the term literally, means clear seeing in French, right? Remote viewing isn't, even though the name says remote viewing, that's really a misnomer. It probably should have been called remote perception, because all elements of perception are involved in remote viewing. You can smell, taste, touch, hear, and see details of the target. You can have all those kind of experiences. Plus, there's this kind of I use the term intuitional knowing before, but really I prefer the term non-local knowing. There are sometimes when you're remote viewing and you just know stuff. You have no idea why you know it, but you know it, and it fits with what you're getting, right? So you've got all of these components put together, whereas in clairvoyance, presumably, it's a visual thing, strictly a visual thing. Being psychic is a very generic term, right? It isn't specific. Remote viewing really focuses on a set of protocols and at least some form of method or approach that you use to do it. So it's a more kind of a rigorous, structured thing than just being psychic, whatever that means. Is that term means so many different things to so many different people that I use it because people understand at least what kind of category it is, right?
Yeah, right.
And but generally speaking, people are rather confused about what it is when people say I'm psychic. They say, "Oh, that's nice. So how are you psychic, or what does that mean?" And
So having done remote viewing for so long, what is really the premise of remote viewing? I mean, not in the sense of what is really your model of reality, basically? And within that, how can you achieve remote viewing? Does that make sense?
Sure. The question makes sense, right?
Yeah.
The answer may not.
Okay, go for it.
So one of the beauties of remote viewing as it was developed in the laboratory. So let me give you just a really quick history here. So the person that actually coined the term remote viewing and came up with the original concept of it was a guy named Ingo Swann. He was an artist in New York, grew up in Colorado and Utah, interestingly enough. Here I am in Utah. Was in the army in Korea, and he decided he wanted to be an artist, and he went to New York and became an artist in New York. But he also got involved in a lot of the parapsychological research there in some of the City College of New York and the American Society of Psychical Research, some really fairly rigorous laboratory work. Came up with a remote viewing thing, and then he and some folks at Stanford Research Institute, at the time belonged to Stanford University, then got spun off. It's now a big government it's a huge government think tank, at least supports the government. They developed it. They all got together and they developed it into a more structured kind of a field, right? So they developed the remote viewing in that sense. And now I've already lost your question. What was your question again?
How does remote viewing work? Within what model?
Oh, gotcha. I gotcha. It was the metaphysics. Essentially, you want the metaphysics of it. So, okay. Yeah. So, with all that context, and you'll understand why I told you that in a second, the whole purpose of remote viewing is to avoid metaphysics altogether. So, in other words, Ingo had a kind of a model. It was kind of a metaphor for how remote viewing worked. It involved the matrix, and that's why Matrix is so popular today. That in the movie, of course.
Right.
This idea of matrix, which is like a huge database, and I don't know when. Subspace or whatever, where all the information in the universe is, and you access that.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there are no metaphysics. You can believe in spirit guides, you can believe in the devil, you can believe in angels or whatever. You can believe anything you want, or don't believe in any of it at all, and remote viewing still works. The goal was to get away from the metaphysics. And so we don't know exactly the scientific context. That would have been nice. There's some thought that maybe quantum entanglement or quantum non-locality explains it. Yeah. But there's reason to think it doesn't, actually. But that's another, maybe we can get into that discussion a little bit. We'll see where you want to go with this. But the fact is, what we do is we give people that model just so they have a way of thinking about it in their heads. And then we teach them the process. And it doesn't matter what you believe about how the universe is put together. It works no matter what your underlying belief is. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, can finish, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, so for example, I'm a Mormon, right?
Yeah.
We have a certain theological construct. Remote viewing fits into it perfectly well. But we had Catholics at Fort Meade, and they had no problem with it. We did have a little bit of trouble with evangelicals. We had a couple of evangelical folks there who didn't last very long. They just freaked them out, and so they ended up leaving the program. But generally speaking, from a religious perspective, it fits many religions. It doesn't require that you believe anything magical or mystical in order for it to work. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing about it.
It doesn't require, but I wonder if it doesn't help, and that's what I tried to do in the movie, by the way. And by the way, for those who are just joining, you guys, we're broadcasting on YouTube, on several pages, on Facebook. So if you're just joining, make sure you type your questions and comments. We'll get to them in a second. But we're talking about remote viewing, and also, so the film Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible, Invisible Made Visible, very relatable to remote viewing. But the idea is to bring as much. Again, there is entanglement has been proven, so that is a scientific fact.
Sure.
But can we justify perhaps some of the events as entanglement or as something similar to that theory? Well, no, to that fact, because this was evidence that two particles that are separate can and do exchange properties spontaneously beyond time and space. And so there are also other research about consciousness itself being a wave, having a description, a wave description. And so Wilhelm Reich was able to actually identify the wavelength and the wave function of consciousness. In his laboratory, he was creating all kinds of experiments, and he would see beyond the physical what consciousness looked like. Anyway, without getting into those details. But his idea was, or his results were, that consciousness is spiraling and has a pattern. And so if that is the case, then consciousness can become coherent with space itself and therefore become entangled. So that was the idea that we were trying to describe, to explain perhaps, how remote viewing could be working. So, yeah. So by the way, let's play the trailer for those who don't know it, because you were prominently in the film and you ran this whole experiment, because I want to also hear about what it was like to train somebody like for 2 hours, in the film.
I don't know. My hair was all messed up. I'm not sure.
You were fantastic. All right, guys. So hang in there. Hang on. I'm going to play the trailer real quick. 1 sec.
Because the energy is all around us, you can communicate with all types of different things.
Well, what we do here is collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline called remote viewing. We essentially wanted to invite you to become a psychic spy.
We know our own CIA had been experimenting in psychic tests and abilities.
The Israelis had an interest in it, and may still. We know for a fact that the Russians were involved in this. We know for a fact that the Chinese were and are probably still involved.
Something's happening that's bigger than us. Oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. Like, this
No,
is
seriously.
insane.
We are pieces of consciousness playing avatars in a virtual reality game called This Physical World.
This is Captain Corey of the USS Red Recorder, leaving a message that may be detected in other universes.
The rain was tapping, and the windows and the wind was banging.
So we sort of come to this world, and I guess in our materialistic sense, we want to forget about vibrations. We just want to think of matter and stuff.
That's a whole unit. That's a large effect. The fact that you can change the acid-alkaline balance in water implies that you could change it in the body.
This is what this is about. Mind over matter. So, what did you think about the movie?
Oh, me?
Yes.
I'm just wondering when you're going to get your Academy Award.
I know, right? But I'd have to do it remotely, whatever that is. But seriously, I mean, there are many films and documentaries, or even on YouTube, about abilities. But I felt it was like all over the place, and it was also still theory. So what I tried to do is demonstrate. Like, we want to see it on camera, and so that's what we did with you, but also with the pH, the water pH, with the telekinesis. That's what we did also with the blindfold, showing that kids were able to read with the blindfolds. We measured the amount of light inside the mask to show that there was no light. They weren't faking, they weren't cheating. All this to demonstrate that the mind, the consciousness, has the ability to bypass the body. And so that was my attempt. So I hope it came across.
No, I thought that was really quite good. I mean, there were some things in there that I was skeptical of, and I came away less skeptical, after seeing your film. The irony is that, having been a remote viewer for 37 years, whatever it is, right? I've come to get a pretty good appreciation generally for stuff that isn't so trustworthy as other stuff. So in a way, I've become more skeptical than I was before I was a remote viewer, right? And so I always approach things cautiously before I will say I absolutely believe that. And there were a couple of things which in advance, because of other things I'd heard, not necessarily seen, but heard, I was a bit dubious about. But I came away from your film there thinking, having a bit more respect for several of the things that you address. So if that was your goal, at least it worked with me. So
thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. That was the goal. And I like when people are skeptical, because we should be skeptical. We shouldn't believe everything, especially that there are people out there who are cheating. There are people doing the mask thing and cheating. There are people like playing tricks and calling it telekinesis. And so how do you differentiate? And because that has been my, life work since I'm 5, I can do these things. I can see remotely. I can see what's on the other side of the wall. I can move whatever the object. And so I know this is real. And hundreds and thousands of people that I've trained, that you've trained, it is real. And so it kind of gives us a bad name sometimes when other people are kind of, not doing it truthfully. And so it's good to be skeptical. But that's why I tried to go the extra mile in the movie. And whenever possible, show how we did it scientifically, how we create a baseline for a long period of time in telekinesis, for example. First, we try to move the object with our hands, but then we do it away from the object, and then we do it remotely, and then we do it in a Faraday cage. So, to show that exactly what you're saying. So this is possible. We may not know all the science, but this is still a real phenomenon. So anyway.
Yeah. Interestingly, my wife, who is a career investigative journalist. She, in fact, finished up her career as the managing editor for the Jack Anderson column in the Washington Post, who is probably the most senior investigative journalist in the country at the time. She's very skeptical about everything, right?
Sure.
And things like the changing the pH of the water and stuff. She was looking at that and she said, there might be something to this.
Wow, that's amazing.
So,
that's
yeah.
incredible. I love that. I love that. And especially, I'm not the first one who did pH, William
Right.
Tiller. He did experiments. So with groups of people focusing on changing the pH, and I've done it several times. So that's why I knew this would work. And other folks have done experiments with water as well. So that's why, I also wanted to describe, how we create a baseline for a long period. We take measurements over and over, and then we see when you start focusing your intention, if there's a change, and then when you stop, if it goes back to the baseline. So yeah, I went out of my way to keep that in the film exactly for that purpose. So I'm glad you're saying that. Yay, your wife. So another thing that I tried to do in the film is to show that anybody can do this. And I don't know if you're in agreement with me, but even though it sounds like the Army, they were picking and choosing different folks. But do you think everybody can do this? That is trained? Anybody can do this?
So first off, they were picking and choosing in the Army because they had a very limited number of positions they could fill, and so they wanted to make the odds as high as possible they'd have success with the people they chose, right?
Right.
But in fact, at SRI, the lab that developed all this stuff, they did a lot of research, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of individual trials. Just as crazy for 23 years, essentially, they're working in it. And their conclusion was that everybody can do this, at least to a limited extent. It's kind of like being able to walk or talk. It's something that we innately have, but we just have to learn how to use it. And the evidence is really quite strong. I mean, in my classes, of course, I've taught a lot of students, and some of them have just blown it out of the ballpark, just been amazing, and others have just kind of struggled, right? And all the way in between. And in general, what I find, the people who struggle are folks who, it isn't that they don't have the ability, it's that they struggle with how to understand.
Yeah,
the
justify.
ability. Yeah. So, and that tends to be it. Everybody can do it, but some people don't get how you learn to do it. They struggle with the learning part.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing that I tried to do in the film. I didn't want to showcase like a group of, advanced spiritual beings, who can do this and nobody else could. And that's why I included random folks from all over, but also some, a few celebrities here and there. So, a wide range of guests in the film. And I wanted to do it live on camera with somebody who's never done it before. And so we called Rachel. Rachel Brooks Smith actually was based in LA. We wanted to film in Utah. And she basically flew in the night before. So she flew in at around 11 p.m. or something. She goes straight to her hotel. It's dark outside. And then the next morning, she goes from the hotel directly to the location where we're filming. So she had no idea. I mean, she didn't really have time to do so, to look around, get a sense of what things look like, literally. And so, I mean, maybe a little bit, but not enough to kind of have that sort of clarity, I would say. You would think, I mean, Southern Utah is very different than Los Angeles in terms of, right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I know, right? And so, how do you think she did? What was your impression of how she did do you think you were able to teach her in like 2 hours?
Well, so these are going to sound contradictory, but I want to say first that I was very impressed, and I wasn't surprised.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
So, that model that we used, I'd used a number of times before. So the film Suspect Zero, we did a similar experiment with the director. He was looking for some material for bonus features for the DVD when it got released, and so I did an outbounder just like we did with Rachel, and he had kind of the same reaction she did. If you recall, she and I were blind to the target. We had no idea what the target was. We did the work there in the house, and then we got in the car, and we didn't know where we were going.
And just to interrupt you, for those who don't know what an outbounder experiment, so you teach Rachel how to do it, and then how does it work?
Well, and then what happens is we are introduced to the outbound team, which is one or two people who then go to the actual location without telling us where they're going. In fact, until they actually leave our presence, they don't know where they're going. And once they're away from us, they're given directions. They go to that place, and then the goal of the remote viewer at that point is to focus in on where those people are. They serve as a kind of a beacon there, where you home in on them and you describe their setting. Okay, and then afterwards, we take the viewer there after it's all done as a feedback event to show them what the target was, and then compare notes as what they perceived versus what it actually is. And so, and you don't even tell them until you actually get to the location. Mm-hmm. So in Elias Marriage, so the director's experience, just like in Rachel's experience, they didn't know what the target was, and I was the one that they guided both settings, right? I didn't know what the target was. We're driving down the road, and they see it up in front of them, and without anybody telling them, they say, "That's what I experienced."
Wow, yeah.
And they get so excited. I did that with Rob Lowe, too, the movie star. Rob Lowe and his sons, they had a series on A&E, the Lowe files, right? Yeah. And they wanted to do remote viewing. So I taught them roughly although I had a little more time than I had with Rachel, but I taught them just general approximation, how you do remote viewing. And then each of them took turns doing targets, being the outbounder and being the remote viewer. Same reaction. They see the target, they go, "This is what I was getting." Yeah. And it's hard to express that on paper and verbally, but when you get there, you know it. And they could have taken them anywhere else, and they said, "No, this isn't right. This isn't right." Took them there. This is what I got. This is what I was experiencing. And it's almost as much fun for me as it is for them, to watch that reaction that they have.
Absolutely. That was priceless. But especially before this exercise, you gave us another quick kind of training, just to practice. And you had a piece of paper, an image in an envelope, and you gave us the coordinates. The reference for
the reference number, the targeting number.
The image. And then we started drawing. I don't know if you remember that. And so Rachel and I were sitting next to each other. We both had the exact same thing. So we saw like water, we saw people, we saw houses. We saw the exact same thing. But then when you showed us the image, it was completely different.
Yeah.
We totally failed the exercise.
Well, and that often happens. That often happens because when you're first trying it, this is part of what goes with learning. People say, "What is it you teach people when you teach in remote view?" And I say, well, I could go into the very complicated answer and tell you all the details, but let me make it very simple. There's two things that it all boils down to. The first thing is to learn what the signal is like, this very subtle signal coming in, to learn how to recognize that. The other thing is to learn to recognize the mental noise, which is all the conclusion jumping and the guessing that your left brain wants to do, and is much louder than that signal. So the trick is to learn the signal, learn what the noise is, the difference between the two, and learn how to extract the noise out and just pick up the signal. So when you first try it a few times, now for some people actually, because they don't know what to expect, they have a real success. But then other times they get into it and they're so used to listening to their left brain that the left brain paints them this picture that's just got nothing to do with the target. It's something it's guessing. And then when they see, well, they don't have anything in common, that's because your left brain didn't pay attention to the actual signal. But then as you do it over time, which is why we did it several times, as you do it over time, you start to kind of tease that out. And when Rachel went to did the Outbounder, she had by then kind of figured out what the difference was, and that's why she was successful.
But how do you explain that both of us had the exact same thing?
Oh, that was your question.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good answer for something else.
No, but that was great too.
Well, I don't remember exactly how you positioned. There's two things that could have happened.
Yeah.
Okay? The one is the more mundane one, where you subliminally, subconsciously, in peripheral vision or whatever, saw what each other was doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't remember how you were sitting, so I can't say if that was the case. The other one is what we call telepathic overlay.
Yeah.
Which is when two people are working on the same project, and one of them has this idea that's really quite strong in their heads, and the other one, trying to figure out what the target is and not knowing what they're doing, says, that sounds good, and telepathically picks up on that, and then they put the same thing down. So, and that may be what happened too.
I think for sure that's what happened, because we weren't looking, and I felt like maybe we were telepathically picking up stuff, which is very interesting, and that's why I'm bringing this up, because people who want to try remote viewing for the first time may experience things like that, which is part of the whole thing, to know how to to discern, are you picking up on somebody else in the room? Are you picking up on the target? Another thing is also, for those who are interested in learning remote viewing, like I said, I had my own methodology. And when I tried to use yours, which is very different. So yours, basically, the subconscious mind is retrieving information from whatever the target is or the location. But in my technique, I actually kind of project my consciousness. It's like it's not out of body, but it's as if I'm traveling there, and then I'm looking at the location. So it slightly feels different. And then you pick up the information that way, and then you bring it back, as opposed to letting your subconscious. Anyway, so it's slightly different. All this to say that it took me a while to kind of readjust to the way you are doing it. And so for those who are also new and who want to try that, to not be discouraged, because if they, like sometimes intuitively they know stuff, but then they learned remote viewing and then it doesn't work. Well, it's because you have to kind of readjust to the technique.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a different way of doing it. And of course, one of the issues you have, people come take my class and they've been doing some other kind of ESP-based modality, and then their way of doing it might be different than the way I do it, right? And when I say the way I do it, I actually stay pretty close to how the people who actually invented remote viewing did it, right? And so there's been a lot of kind of divergence out there, and sometimes people do what they call remote viewing, and it's not remote viewing. I'm not saying that's your case here, but you'll get a lot of people out there who are absolutely sure that remote viewing and channeling, for example, are the same thing. They are not, not at all, right? And so what you're doing does sound like a version of remote viewing. It's what I call GRV, for generic remote viewing, right? And all of the early remote viewers, each one of them had their own little way of doing it. And some of them did a kind of a projected consciousness thing. Now, I even do that to some degree when I'm doing a remote viewing session. But the danger of that is that if you're projecting consciousness, sometimes imagination will build in, right? And the goal of the original formulation of remote viewing was to try and get away from imagination as much as possible. Yeah. So if you get into it, and as you get more experience and you get more tuned into how it feels when you're right versus how it feels when you're wrong, then gradually things do open up. So, as long as if you're having success, that's the bottom line. If it's working, if you're producing real data that you can actually verify, then that's fine. I don't care how you do it, right? There's a lot of people who do it and they produce all kinds of data that you can't verify, and they still think they're being successful. No, if you can't verify what you're getting, if you can't prove from other sources that what you got is correct, then we don't know if you got anything right or not. That's the key to remote viewing, is that you have to be able to verify what you've got, or it could just be your imagination, without further evidence that you don't know, right?
Yeah, because a lot of people are just intuitive. They pick up stuff. So you have it's a protocol, and then I have my own, and so I tested mine, and you tested yours. So all this to say that people who also come in being intuitive and picking up stuff, I think it's good to give each protocol its fair trial. Like really try it exactly the way, and then you will feel whatever is more suited for you. But I just remember I was like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's like it was so fun, kind of trying to rework it differently. Anyway, going back to Rachel and how successful she was with the Outbounder. So I go off on a location. Again, she's not familiar with the scenery or anything. I could have been at a McDonald's for all she knows, right?
And we were hoping you were, because we were hungry by then.
Right? And so no clue whatsoever. You're sitting with her and basically guiding her. And she's just picking up information of what I'm doing, what the location looks like, colors, shapes. And I just want to play this clip where she ends up going to the location and then she discovers what she had been seeing in her head. So
that was fun.
Yeah, it was so fun. It was awesome.
Oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. Like, this is insane. Lights, I wrote down lights. And I literally thought there's Christmas lights, and I said decorative lights in the front, and a whole building is a structure that's unleveled. Like, I am mind blown right now. Let's check it out. Oh my god! Really? Like I can't believe it. Like, I literally can't believe it.
So what happened?
Well, first of all, one of the biggest things that I picked up on was decorative lights. Like, I literally wrote like Christmas lights, decorative lights, and
that's a Christmas tree.
That's a Christmas tree. And right here you can see I wrote lights, Christmas, decorative.
The first thing I did is I walked all the way to the Christmas tree.
I kept saying this like kind of reddish color, and obviously like all the buildings
are red.
Amazing. But I also said, remember the circular thing next to the carousel? I said there's this red feeling that's like almost like a circular feeling.
This was a crash course.
Yes.
In just a few hours, and you've never been here before. What did you learn about yourself?
I think it just reconfirmed for me the belief that we have so much more capabilities than we think we do, and that I think if you can have an open mind and learn and try new things, who knows what you'll be capable of, especially after this experience. If we could all live just in more curiosity, not trying so hard, but just being curious about life and about our abilities, I feel like we could achieve so much more, as well as just experience and enjoy life so much more.
Her reaction is priceless.
Yeah.
That was so good. So by the way, you guys, this is the movie Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. You can find it on superhumanfilm.com, and you'll find all the platforms there. And Paul, so what are you up to now? Are you teaching regularly? Like, where can people learn remote viewing? Do they go to one website? Let us. What are your projects?
Yeah, probably. Well, I'll give you the website real quick. It's rviewer.com. It's rviewer.com. So it's like remote viewer, but without the emote part. Right? So rviewer.com. You can find everything from there, more or less. Right. I normally teach live classes. Classes because of COVID. I've postponed all of that until we have a solution. Right. But I am actually teaching an online class for the Ryan Research Center, which is the oldest scientific parapsychology research laboratory in the country. Started way back in the 20s and 30s by J.B. Ryan, who was a pioneer in the field. I'm teaching an online remote viewing class for them, and I teach various classes for them too, and writing books and all that kind of thing. Can I show them my book?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So if anybody's actually more interest, has additional interest in remote viewing, I recommend my book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, right? The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. You can get it on Amazon or search for it online. GuideToRemoteViewing.com is the website. The point of the book is for people like you who've heard about it, maybe know a little bit about it, but would like to have a more comprehensive discussion. And many of the questions we just talked about during this time, I go into some detail. I talked about the science behind it, how it's done. I give you examples of really successful remote viewing sessions in there. So film first, Superhuman, watch Superhuman first. But if you want to get a little more in-depth introduction to remote viewing, I highly recommend that book, or going to my website. I have a lot of information there too.
Yeah,
so
and
ourviewer.com.
Ourviewer.com, and also if you sign up for an update, like for a newsletter, then you'll get a newsletter that tells you when you're teaching next and things like that.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do have a newsletter that's linked to that page.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but just going back real quick to the success we had with Rachel. This is a testimony to, Paul taught her in 2 hours, literally. And we have cameras, we have a crew. This is not the most conducive, like for concentration, learning something new. Under pressure, she did pretty awesome. Even to prove that she was so on target and she was really remote viewing. Do you remember the Starbucks incident?
Oh.
That was so funny.
Yes.
We have to go ahead.
We're in the session, and I don't remember the exact details, but she's describing a green and white cup and a reminder of Starbucks and stuff. And I'm thinking, I didn't say this to her, but I'm thinking, those idiots, they stopped in at Starbucks. That's going to screw everything up. And sure enough, that's what happened. You guys had stopped in there, and she picked up on that. So,
and you had told me, make sure you go straight to the target.
Yes.
And I wasn't a good student because I said, I was like, we've been filming all day. Can we just sneak a little coffee on the way? They won't know. We literally zipped through the drive-through and then went to the Target. We're like, there's no way, they're going to.
Yeah, except that you were enjoying that Starbucks coffee so much that it went right through. So I have to tell you, the reason I told you that is because of a hard experience I learned myself. Maybe I told you at the time, I don't know, but my very first ever remote viewing experiment, I had gotten recruited into the program. I'd been in it for 2 weeks, and they said, now you're going to try it. Well, I haven't been trained. They said, it's okay. We like to just give you kind of a diagnostic test, right? So we did an outbounder, and the target was this massive water tower, huge blue water tower, which should have been immediately visible. But all I did was I talked about this little place where you go in, and there were little tables, and there was a counter with little things inside the glass counter, and I described it really quite well. And we get to the water tower, I had described nothing about it. Total failure, right? On the way back, I happened to notice this little donut shop off to the left. And I look at that thing, and I say, I want to stop there. And Skip Atwater, who knew what I had done, I didn't know it, but he knew. He said, it doesn't matter what you describe if you don't, it doesn't matter if you don't describe the target, it doesn't matter what you did describe instead. And we went over there, and I walked in, and it was exactly as it was in my head, as it had been in my head back at the remote viewing room. I had remote viewed the donut shop that they had stopped at on their way back.
There you go.
Yes, and so that's why I warned you, don't stop anywhere, because I knew that could happen, and it did.
But wait, isn't that more of a proof that you are remote viewing? Because if it's not even on the program, then it's like not even supposed to happen, and you still see it. It means you're there.
That is evidence, but the thing is, when you are being trained to go where you're supposed to go, and you go somewhere else instead, that gets you in trouble. Now, in this case with Rachel, just the fact that she picked up on your Starbucks detour didn't stop her from actually remote viewing the target. So she was a better student than I was. Of course, she'd had a little training and I hadn't. But anyway,
But that was fascinating. We were blown away by how she picked that up. Anyway, all right. So you guys, by the way, we've been talking about the movie Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible, and remote viewing. So if you have questions, Lori, we have Lori here with us. We have people from Europe, from everywhere, actually, on Facebook, on YouTube. And so if you have any questions for Paul or myself, this is the time. Lori, are you still there? Did we lose you?
No, I've just been listening intently, and actually, Paul has a couple of students that are watching on the YouTube channel, so
Cool.
they've been answering everyone's questions.
Oh.
It seems like for most of them, letting them know where your classes are and how to get your books, and yeah, so they're doing a great job out there.
Oh.
But we do have some questions from Facebook, so let me bring those up. This is for you, Caroline.
Okay.
Is your remote viewing technique similar to what would be called bilocation?
No, it's actually quite different because I also do bilocation. So it's more, it's a combination of you're stretching your consciousness, you're never leaving your body, and then you travel through what I call the grid system. So it's very methodical. I'm very technical. I like things very technical. So I show a grid pattern, which is the time-space grid, and you stretch your consciousness through the time-space grid, and then you land or you arrive at the location. Your higher consciousness knows that location. You don't have to have coordinates at all. So you arrive there, and because the time grid has openings, it's a 0 point. It's as if it's like a portal, if you will, that you can look through. Then it reveals everything. And at the same time, you are also merging with that location. So you start to feel, see, sense in your body what's over there. And so you, all the senses come together, and it's as if you are there, and at the same time, your body here is writing down what you are sensing over there.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. And by location, you can actually do this in several locations at the same time. So that's why it's slightly different. And so the time grid, so for me, not everybody's like that. Like same with the water. For example, I like to focus on the, hydrogen molecules multiplying, whatever. Somebody else would say, well, I'm not a scientific person, or whatever. Just focusing on the intent works, and that's fine. So whatever works for you. But for me, I like very technical things, and I like to know how I'm traveling through space. Is it possible to travel through space? Are there other entities that are blocking me or something? All that comes into account for me, because since I was a kid, I can see the beings and I can see the energy. So I can see that it's possible for other things to interfere. So because of that, I created those very specific technical steps.
Okay, and here is another question. I think this could be for both of you. Could it be remote hearing instead of viewing? Does this happen?
Remote hearing? Yeah. Go ahead.
That's part of the whole package. Is when you're in a remote viewing session, you're supposed to be paying attention to sounds and things you might hear as well. So yeah, I talk about remote viewing as kind of being a cocktail of all of the perceptions and senses, right? That unlike clairvoyance, which is allegedly just seeing, it's hearing and smelling and tasting and touching and all of that. Any one of those things can come in, or all of them. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also some people sense things more than they see. Some people see more than they can hear. Some people hear things more than they can smell. So it really, I think for each person, it comes stronger through one of the senses usually, and then the rest kind of complements the picture. Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. And what else?
So the next one is, what would be the best way to start to learn remote viewing at home?
Ooh, Paul?
Well, get educated, read some of the better books. There's a lot of stuff out there, right? And some of it's better than others. It's one of the reasons that one of the reasons I created this book is because there wasn't a good introductory work in the field, and there still isn't until I did this one, even now. Now, I can tell you what I offer. Okay, so the book is a starting point. My website is a starting point. And also, I recommend the website of the International Remote Viewing Association, irva.org. Both of those have a lot of good background information on this free. The book is then next least expensive thing. I also offer an DVD-based home study course called Remote Perception. Now, I call it Remote Perception because I think that's what remote viewing should have been called, right? So it's called Remote Perception. It's still a remote viewing course, and that's available. And then, of course, then there's my live training, which is not happening right now, but it is a bit of a pricey option because I restrict my courses to 2 students per instructor. It's a very small student-teacher ratio. If I have more than 2 students, I bring in another instructor to assist. And so it's pretty expensive, but it is very, very, very thorough. If you want to learn it, really learn it, it's probably the best place to go. But there are these other options that aren't so expensive, and actually you can do now during the time of COVID. Somebody's going to name a book that the time of COVID.
Right, especially now. But what do you think about like fun stuff, like just to get you started? Like, for example, when I was a kid, I would look on the other side of the wall and try to, try to find what's there, who's there, what's happening. Sometimes I would look in my closet and I would, like, of course, the closet is closed, and I would see that things were, like my mother or whatever was change the order of where stuff is. And I would try to say, okay, I wonder where she put my socks or something, like stuff like that. And then you'd open and verify. What do you think about little games like that? Or does that mess you up by the time you get to a real
I used to make before I'd let them open their Christmas presents, I'd make my kids describe what was inside the package.
There you go. Yeah.
I did that actually too to my wife before we were married. The first Christmas that we were spending time together, I gave her it was a picture. It was actually a foil art picture of a rocking horse, very elaborate, very, very pretty, And I gave it to her, and I said, "Now, before you open it, you have to describe it." She said, "Oh, I can't do this. Yeah, that's just ridiculous. That's impossible." I said, "No, just go ahead. Just suspend your critical aspect here and just tell me what comes to mind when you think about what's inside this package." And she said, "Well, the only thing that comes to my mind is a very decorative carousel horse." And I said, "Okay, open it up." And when she opened it up and saw it was not a carousel horse, but a rocking horse, but it was very decorative, it freaked her out.
There you go. So, but again, in your mind, from your perspective, is she picking, because you know what the target is, you know what's inside the box. So is she picking up on what you know, or is she picking up on what's there?
You know what? I think probably she's picking up on what's there, but it's possible she's picking up what I knew about it, right? And the reason I say I think she's picking up on what's there is because when they used to do outbounders at SRI, they would send them out. The question always was, well, are they picking up on the mental contents of the people that are the beacon team? Is that where they're getting the information? But on many occasions, they found that the viewers were picking up on stuff that the outbound team had no way of accessing. Stuff on top of the buildings, stuff inside of rooms that were closed. They're picking up all kinds of stuff that they couldn't possibly have gotten telepathically. So I think there may be a small telepathic component to it, particularly for people who may not know what they're doing, right? But generally speaking, remote viewing really is independent of telepathy in many, many cases. So.
Yeah, that's good to know, because if they're picking up stuff that the crew can't even get to, then that's proof that. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I think this discipline is just so fascinating. So you guys heard it. Start practicing by trying to figure out, or just go in a store or go somewhere so you don't know, you don't have a frame of reference, and try to guess or sense, remote view what's on the other side of the aisle or whatever. Sure. I think it's fun, and it gets you kind of in this playful, relaxed mode. So by the time you do learn remote viewing, you're not so like, oh my God, how do So I think I recommend that actually, to just start.
No, it's good. Yeah. It's good.
All right, cool. Okay, you guys, Paul, it's been so fun. I can talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours because it's connected to other things and other things and other things. I try to stay focused on the discipline, but I so appreciate you being in a movie. I'm so glad you did an amazing job. You're in the trailer, and you're nicely featured in this section that was so important in the film. So I so appreciate it. So folks, again, if you want to see that film, superhumanfilm.com, and for Paul's website, ourviewer.com for classes and everything else that he's doing.
And I just want to say thank you for making me look way better than I normally do.
Oh, you were awesome. You look great. You're very easy. I mean, we're the ones. I mean, you remember, it's hard to make a film. People don't realize, but every shot, every interview, it's a 3-hour setup between the cameras and the lights and the sound techs and this and that. So it's a lot of work. And so I'm hoping people will really appreciate, that we brought all of this together in one package, from remote viewing to experiments, again, with water, with blindfolds. And by the way, the blindfolds thing some people think it's a form of remote viewing, but I don't think so, because I've tried it. And in fact, I do it myself. And we train people. And so it's slightly different, because now that I know how you do remote viewing, I don't think it's a form of remote viewing. It's actually also something different, which is amazing that we also feature in the film. So anyway, well, thank you so much again. And
thank you.
I hope to see you again very, very soon. And good luck with your classes. And everyone, thank you so much for joining. And don't forget to subscribe to his Facebook page, to my YouTube channel. It's free. And we're bringing you all this wealth of information. So I hope to see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.